Can absolute power in the hands of one truly promise peace and order, or does it breed fear and tyranny? Welcome, fellow thinkers, to a journey into the depths of political philosophy. Today we turn our gaze towards a figure whose ideas have sparked debate for centuries. That figure would be none other than Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes, a man of the 17th century, was a firm believer in the concept of absolute monarchy and authoritarianism. He proposed that a single supreme ruler was the remedy to chaos and disorder, a view that was, and still is, fiercely contested. His thoughts, encapsulated in his seminal work, Leviathan, have left an indelible mark on how we perceive authority, power, and the social contract. But does Hobbes's argument hold water? Can placing absolute power in the hands of one truly bring about a state of peace and order? Or does it pave the way for despotism and tyranny? To understand this, we will have to venture into the mind and philosophy of Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes, a name synonymous with the defense of absolute monarchy. This 17th century English philosopher made a compelling case for the need of an absolute ruler, a leviathan, to maintain the delicate balance of societal order. Hobbes's argument for absolute monarchy was not born out of a romanticized view of kings and queens, but rather a deep understanding of human nature and its inherent flaws. Hobbes saw humans as naturally self-centered beings driven by their desires and fears. This view of humanity, he believed, necessitated a powerful, singular ruler to keep these selfish tendencies in check. He argued that without a central authority to impose laws and punishments, society would descend into a state of chaos, a condition he famously described as solitary, poor, nasty, brutish and short. Now, Hobbes wasn't promoting tyranny. Instead, he advocated for a social contract where individuals willingly surrender their rights and freedoms in exchange for protection and order. This absolute ruler, or leviathan, as Hobbes would call it, is not an oppressive force, but a necessary one. It's a trade-off, a compromise, where the many give up their individual freedom to the one, ensuring harmony and avoiding the perils of anarchy. But there's a catch. Hobbes' Leviathan is entrusted with an immense amount of power. The ruler is the judge, jury and executioner, holding the power to enact laws, enforce them and punish those who disobey. This concentration of power, while effective in maintaining order, leaves room for potential misuse and abuse. So, we're left with a paradox. On one hand, we have Hobbes' vision of a society where individuals live in peace under the watchful eye of an absolute ruler. On the other hand, we have the concern that such a ruler, unchecked by any other power, might succumb to the same selfish tendencies Hobbes feared in all humans. In Hobbes' view, the absolute ruler is the guardian of societal peace. But what about the potential for misuse of such unbridled power? We would have to agree that the prospect of unchallenged power in the hands of one would in fact naturally invite criticism, wouldn't you say? Thomas Hobbes' staunch support for absolute monarchy and authoritarianism has not been without its detractors. Critics argue that an unchecked concentration of power can be a recipe for tyranny and abuse. They contend that when a single authority holds all the reins, the potential for despotic rule is alarmingly high. In contrast to Hobbes' belief in the necessity of an absolute sovereign for peace and order, these critics place great emphasis on the importance of checks and balances. They argue that power, when divided among different entities, can counteract the tendency for any one entity to become too powerful, thus preventing the rise of tyranny. This ensures that no single authority can exercise absolute power, thus safeguarding the rights and freedoms of the people. Moreover, critics point out the potential for human rights abuses under an absolute monarchy. They argue that when all power resides with a single ruler, there is a significant risk of human rights being trampled upon. In the absence of any checks and balances, the monarch may act in self-interest, disregarding the welfare of the people. Critics also highlight that Hobbes' views are predicated on the assumption that the sovereign will act in the best interest of the people, which, in that itself, is no guarantee. However, they question the validity of this assumption. History is replete with examples of absolute monarchs who acted primarily in their own interests, often to the detriment of their subjects. The critics' fear is not just theoretical. We have seen time and again how unchecked power can lead to gross human rights abuses, from the despotic rule of autocrats to the atrocities committed under totalitarian regimes. In conclusion, while Hobbes's views provide an interesting viewpoint on the necessity of a strong central authority for maintaining peace and order, they are not without their flaws. Critics argue that absolute power can lead to tyranny and abuse, and that checks and balances are necessary to safeguard the rights and freedoms of the people. So, we see a clash of perspectives, Hobbes' assurance of order and the critic's fear of unchecked power. Where does this leave us in the debate on Hobbes' views? We've traversed the intricacies of Hobbes' defense for absolute monarchy and heard the counterpoints raised by his critics. Let's now consider the balance of the argument. On one hand, we have the tenets of Hobbes' philosophy. He posits that the necessity of absolute power is fundamental for societal order. Without a monarch's undisputed authority, he argues, life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and very short. This perspective appeals to our inherent need for stability and security, underscoring the value of a strong, centralized authority in preventing chaos and lawlessness. On the other hand, we have the critiques, the voices of caution that warn against the potential abuse of such absolute power. They argue that unchecked authority can lead to tyranny and oppression. They remind us of the importance of individual rights and freedoms, questioning if the price of Hobbes' societal order is too steep. In sum, the debate on Hobbes' views is a tug-of-war between security and freedom, societal order and individual rights. It's a complex discussion that continues to shape our understanding of governance and power dynamics. It's a dialogue that challenges us to think critically about the nature of authority, questioning its role and its limits in our society. As we reflect on this, remember, the question isn't about picking a side, but understanding the complexity of power and governance. As we conclude, it's worth noting that Hobbes' philosophy continues to spark debate. His ideas, though centuries old, still echo in the chambers of contemporary political discourse. They continue to push us to question the essence of authority, the role of the state, and the rights of the individual. His support for absolute monarchy may be contentious, yet it forces us to engage in profound reflection. Whether we agree or disagree with Hobbes, his views challenge us to think deeply about the nature of power, authority, and the human condition. Although this episode has come to an end, the discussion, as in all philosophy, is hardly finished. As always, we thank you for joining us for another episode here at Philosophical Flicks, and we look forward to seeing you in the next. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.